Slavery is the headline today. Big headlines on the slave issue, the burning issue of slavery and whether or not we should abolish slavery. We thought the matter was settled in 1865, but it is not settled at all. There are stories in the Times Free Press today. There are accounts out of probably the best reporting platform in Tennessee on the state slavery problem at WSMV.com, and Demetria DeCalidamos is the reporter of the latest account. Her name is Demetria Kalodimos. I'm sorry, I'm mispronouncing her name. She's the author of an important series of reports that exposed CoreCivic, the private for-profit contractor, and its misfeasance, and in regard to and in the service of the Tennessee Department of Correction. Now, the Tennessee Department of Correction holds 21,000 slaves and operates 10 prisons, and some of them are in the ownership of this corporation. Now, there's been an audit by the comptroller of state government that has given a searing report about conditions in the prison. And the Times Free Press today, make sure you get your hard copy of the paper today. Get the hard copy and make note of the details, and go on the jump page and read there also the details of neglected sick people, and many policies and procedures that are intended to make these institutions safe are not being followed, and these abuses affect even correspondence for David Tulis and Nooga Radio. That is me, David Tulis, your host here, and I now, with the arrival in yesterday's mail, I am the recipient of correspondence. I have 3 correspondents. I had only 2. The second one that I obtained by correspondence, again, snail mail, is Robert Z. Whipple. Robert Z. Whipple over in Jasper. He's in a prison there, and his grievance very well typed out. Is a man who cares about the facts. He cares about the details, and who knows that someone like me as a journalist wants the facts. I don't want just allegations. I want to know facts, times, dates, policy numbers, names of officers, and the like, and what happened, and so on. In other words, a factual report. And of course, reports are, one can say reports are all biased, and when I'm in the press, so I admit that every report is biased in some way. The goal, of course, is to, if you're in the press, or if you're in the media, which is an operation well below the authority in our constitutional state, the esteemed authority of the press. If you're in just the media, your goal should be, and the press generally is, to show both sides of conflict so that the reader or listener or viewer can make up his mind. And Demetria's story today at WSMV Dateline Nashville leads with 2 Democratic legislators who are going to make a recommendation. Now, the recommendation is that this executive branch agency in state government not be renewed. I get that? Now, I laugh at that because I hadn't really thought about reauthorization. And we have a state slave system that's authorized in the Constitution to enslave all those duly convicted of a crime, right? We've outlawed, thanks to President Lincoln's war against Southern independence, you might say the War of Northern Aggression, we've outlawed as a country, as a unified people under the banner of the United States, slavery. Personal chattel slavery is not allowed. And yet we have state slavery. It's in our Constitution. For crimes duly convicted, you can be enslaved. Those 2 provisions are right next to each other. And it is in the Bill of Rights, in fact, that you cannot be enslaved privately in Tennessee. But the authorization question I hadn't really thought about. And Demetria Kalodimos says that the expiry date of this agency, an executive branch agency overseen by Governor Bill Haslam, is June the 30th, and it's been reauthorized time after time since 1923. And there are 2 stories here. But one's the state story about these abuses and the audit, and the local story is the local reaction piece about it, and that's in the Chattanooga Times Free Press. And Zach Peterson has the latest, you might say, the sidebar. If you're here, of course, that's the main bar. And Zach, in his he mentions on the type that appears on page 1, above the fold, he mentions the inmate who is struggling to get access to legal materials, and then he introduces him on the jump page inside A section. That's Robert Z. Whipple, one of my correspondents, from whom I've had one very, very good letter. And if you follow my show, David Tulis show here at Nooga Radio, 92.7 FM and 95.3 HD4, that's high definition. High def, super clear, super beautiful signal 60 miles out. You will know his name, though I've not given him a lot of attention, partly because he has not flooded me as my primary correspondent has over in Wartburg at Morgan County Correctional Complex in Wartburg, Tennessee, and that's the man whose name seems to come from a William Faulkner novel, Grenda Ray Harmer. That's his name, Grenda. Sometimes he signs his name Ray, but he always attaches his slave number with his name, and you can't get a piece of correspondence to a state slave unless you have the number appended to the last vowel or consonant that is his last letter of his name. You have to have that slave number there. Otherwise, the system won't know who you're talking about and will reject your letter and send it back to you. We have a lot to cover, and I just wanted to mention that the Democrats in the General Assembly are going to vote to not reauthorize the TDOC to be renewed. The names are Senate Representative Bo Mitchell and Mike Stewart, both Nashville Democrats. Of course, these are pro boards, right? These are people who are concerned about the right to kill your baby, so they're sort of socialists in their outlook. Demetria Kaladimo says they're also going to recommend strongly the state should no longer use CoreCivic to operate facilities used by the state. 3 of the findings in the audit dealt with facilities operated by CoreCivic. Stewart says, I can't remember ever receiving a comptroller's report that shows such flagrant disregard for the reporting requirements by a contractor. So a lot of these are just bureaucratic problems, right? They're not inherently inhumane. They're just reporting. The agency is not getting reports. It's not giving reports. And Truesdale, for example, which is owned by CoreCivic, formerly CCA, Corrections Corporation of America, trading on the public exchanges, and Whitfield Correctional Facility in West Tennessee, both managed by CoreCivic, operated with fewer than approved correctional officer staff. They did not have all staffing rosters, did not follow staffing patterns, she reports, guidelines, and 1 left critical posts unstaffed. So there's you might say, not enough people on the payroll to make people safe. The party chairman, Mary Mancini, here again from the left, commenting, we don't need an audit to know private prisons are immoral and should not exist, she says. So here's a Democrat saying something that's true. I mean, this is remarkable. That is news. That is news. There should never be a financial incentive for incarceration. She says this audit confirms there is insufficient oversight of the private contractors and that outsourcing is not about efficiency but about using public dollars to create corporate profits. The Tennessee legislature should end the use of private prisons immediately. 21,000 people in 10 prisons. CoreCivic, of course, and the department offer these statements that just put you to sleep. They just absolutely have an anodynous effect, right? The anodyne of the well-crafted press release, the blanket denial. And the department says it has a commitment to safety and security of staff, offenders, and the public remains unwavering. Okay. As mentioned in the management comments in this audit, multiple steps have already been taken to address the findings noted in the report. We continue to work closely with our government and other partners and are confident. So, you have an agency that has government partners, right? And then others. And are confident in the progress we have made and the services which are provided. And CoreCivic just absolutely puts you to sleep with its statement as well. And maybe I should just give you a sample. We've acknowledged previously there were challenges. This is a common word when we've messed up. There were challenges to bringing the Truesdale Turner Correctional Center up to full speed as after its opening. We've worked hard to address the challenges we faced. And while we still have work to do, we are making progress. So that's a very well crafted anodyne statement from this for-profit corporation. Now, locally here in Chattanooga, the county commission is voting to accept a grant for mental health. And here, this also is from the Chattanooga Times Free Press yesterday. My wife Jeanette, knowing that I followed this story for your benefit, for your edification, drew it to my attention. Yesterday, the county commission voted Wednesday to accept $25,000 in grants. The paper reports from Blue Cross Blue Shield of Tennessee and CHI Memorial, that's Catholic Health Initiatives Memorial, to get started with moving people out of the jail who have mental problems into treatment beds. And Sheriff Hammond is working with insurance companies and charities and others to try to get people who have mental problems from being locked up in the jail. Many of them are there because they're too poor to make bail, right? They're homeless, they're troubled people, they're in poverty, they have poverty of ideas as well as poverty of means. They have a lot of lint in their pockets, and many of them have a lot of lint between their ears, and are, they're sort of morally incapacitated. They have moral problems, which I would say stem from a rejection of God in some way, and so they have an authority problem, right? They don't recognize His authority over them and his commandments over their doings and their beings. Robert Whipple, as I mentioned, is brought up in Zach Peterson's very fine story today in the Chattanooga Times Free Press. Robert Whipple is 42, and he filed a lawsuit against the Tennessee Parole Board and also named Bledsoe's warden. 42-year-old Robert Whipple said guards have denied him and 120 or so inmates from accessing the law library. And it's a series of catch-22 rules and regulations that effectively make it impossible to get court cases for your own work. And you have the idea of the jailhouse lawyer. I'd say if God ever ordains me to go into a jail or a prison, I would be hopefully very serviceable to fellow slaves there as I bide my time. I can help them get their litigation out the door, and probably just make up stuff as I go. And he says the area has legal text and a computer terminal to search for specific cases, Whipple said, and they're essential because he's representing himself and has no other access to the courts. Steve Moore, a defense attorney, is quoted by the Times Free Press, and he says he told Zach Peterson, for some of these guys who are representing themselves, it's hard to fight a case if they don't have access to legal materials, and some of the federal courts have held it's unconstitutional. It's a constitutional deprivation if they're denied that. So that is some of the news, but just some of the background here. Architecture forms the way people think, and I was thinking this morning back on a story I had done about the public library. And it's designed. The public library is just an abomination. It's intended to be ugly. It's intended to look like a fortress, like those cannon, those 240 millimeter cannon bunkers that the Germans built along the beaches facing England, dreading as it finally came, dreading an invasion from Great Britain. And those bunkers with a cannon snout poking out had kind of concrete, steel enforced overhangs, and that's what it looks like in the public library. Well, that building is called the brutalist style, and if you want to read about that, go to Nooganomics.com, our chief sponsor. And we had an interview with an architect, Bill Wilkerson, pointing out the fabulous interior concept of this brutalist design in that library. But as I thought about it, I looked at that style and I said, where else do we find that kind of style in Chattanooga? The style famous in Marxist countries, in the European East Bloc, the GDR, Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, and Czechoslovakia. Well, you find that in the police department on Nicola Highway, and then in that hellhole on Walnut Street downtown, the downtown jail, the county jail. That building, it says what it is. Its design conveys the message of the interior life in that building. And also, it glows a kind of negative radiation, a blue radiation almost, across the city. And whereas the city and its architecture is all about progress and prospect and service and an elevation of ideas, elevation of services, that you can see in various other architectural styles. You see in that building, you see the brutalist or international design. And it comes about through the excessive use, I would say, extensive use of concrete, the interior supports of a building put on the outside. They look strong. They look like bunkers. They look like, they look like something that an East Bloc dictator in the 1950s would say, this building represents my cause, my people, and my sure government on their behalf, as I represent the people with my party here in Yugoslavia, or the old Czechoslovakian Union under Marxist theory. And so we have a building that says what goes on inside. It says that it is about brutality, and it is about slavery. Now, yes, the slave story continues. As I was leading family worship yesterday with family, and I'm gonna have to get to my new correspondence letter in just a minute. I was reading out of the book of Jeremiah, and I looked back a chapter, and I said, well, there's a chapter about Israelites in slavery, and it came to me that I need to pay more attention to the slave story and the prospect of abolition. There are two abolitions that we care about here in Chattanooga and Nooga Radio. One is the abolition of the killing of babies. 9,113 babies were destroyed in 2015. 151 of them among women who reside in Hamilton County, according to that very moldy state data out of Nashville. They massage the numbers for 2 years before they let you know how many babies were killed. The other abolition is of slavery. Now, I think slavery should be abolished, and particularly state slavery. Now, you haven't thought about that, but the slavery issue is getting a lot of attention among Christians. Now, there's a writer named Joel McDermott whose book is The Problem of Slavery in Christian America. And he's talking about how slavery was protected by Christianity, by ministers, by Christian people, and accepted, and the Bible's teachings rejected. The Bible's teachings were rejected in the Old South, and as early as the late 1600s, 1700s, we had slaves coming in, and the defense of slavery mounted even among writers I have esteemed. Robert L. Dabney, for example, the Presbyterian minister, a magnificent writer, has. One of the first books I read about it was in Switzerland as a student, as a young teacher there in Switzerland, and it was Virginian Defense of the South by Robert L. Dabney. And my friend there said, you don't know about this issue, but you're an American, you need to read this book. So I did. It was the defense of slavery, using discredited Jewish and Mohammedan fables that talk about the son of Noah that became the basis of the black race. And in other words, you're metaphysically bound to be a slave, not ethically bound into slavery. Slavery is a judgment, and it results from the fall. And one is a slave by circumstances, and often ethically, not metaphysically. In other words, just because you're a son of Ham or black doesn't mean that you're metaphysically inferior and therefore intended by God to be forever in a slavish case, right? And the chat, back to family worship, right, just after dinner, my mother crouched next to me at the table there, just listening. She knows a little bit of the Bible, but not much, and she listens very attentively as I read the word. I didn't read this chapter though in Jeremiah for condemning the Israelites for not letting Israelites who had been enslaved go free. And the rule was, if you come into an Israelite or come to an Israelite who has, because of circumstances, has to be enslaved, right? That means you care for him, and he's supposed to work for you. He has to be freed. If you obtain this person in slavery, he has to be freed in 7 years. No matter whether he can afford it or not, no matter whether he's paid himself off or bought himself back from you or not, he has to be freed. The Christians in the South rejected that law. They rejected that requirement, as Joel McDermott in his book argues, and it's called The Problem of Slavery in Christian America from American Vision. And that is something that comes from the camp of the Christian Reconstructionists, the Reformed wing, the Neo-Puritan wing in Christianity, of whom there are one or two people in Chattanooga who think in that direction. The most useful of all Christian authorities and writers, the Reformed wing. McDermott says American Christians who are sympathetic to the South and overlook the faults of Christianity in the slavery issue are simply wrong and mistaken biblically. They're biblically wrong. And the passage in Jeremiah that I want to mention talks about the necessity for a Christian to be free. Now, what happened is in the South, blacks became Christians, and yet their white masters did not free them as the Bible requires. The Bible requires them to be free, no matter what. After 6 years, once they became a Christian, they had to be freed, and the whites did not free them. The white Christians did not obey the Christian scriptures ordaining that God's people be free, because that's what Christianity is all about. And yet, freedom, liberty, and prosperity, not being subject and subjugated. David Tulis, you're ready, 92.7. And now some message.
The Tennessee Valley's news talk leader, Nooga Radio, digital and